Welcome back, mamas. You guys, I am so excited for today because we are talking about boundaries, and that may sound scary to some of you, but I promise you, when you are done listening to this episode, you are going to look at boundaries in a whole new light, and you are going to know that you need to set them and why. And you're actually might be excited about it. So let's get to it. Hey, mama, welcome to Prioritize with Purpose. Do you wish you had more time in your day and to feel like you've accomplished something at the end of each day? Do you find yourself up at night, doubting yourself, wondering if you've done enough, but also if you'll ever have time for you again? Do you wake up with big plans only to feel exhausted, out of control, and a little like Cinderella when your to-do list just seems to grow and your day gets thrown off track again? I'm Danielle. I too was a mom of littles running around with endless to-do lists. I too felt behind and guilty, wishing I could find balance, get clarity, and be more present in the moment with my kids. I kept telling myself I didn't have time. Schedules must just not be for me, and that I was too tired to figure it all out. I felt so alone until I made a decision to dig deep and get clear about what I wanted and why. In this podcast, we embrace where we are, but we don't stay there. I'll guide you with transformational tips. You'll learn mindset shifts and be challenged to take back control of your days so you get the most important things done and can be a more present mama who feels like yourself again. So grab the kiddos a snack and get your laundry, because I know you're multitasking, and let's get into what I like to call aligned flow. Okay, mama. So we talked Tuesday about empathy and about people pleasing, and I referenced boundaries quite a bit, and I said I was going to do an episode on it, and today is the day we are going to talk about boundaries. Now, before you turn this off and think, no, I can't talk about boundaries. That's scary. I know I don't set boundaries. I probably need to. Please listen to this episode, because I promise you, you are going to think about boundaries in a whole different light than you may currently think about them. And it is going to become less scary for you to set those boundaries and be able to set those boundaries. I believe that is my hope for you today. And so let's just talk about what boundaries actually are. I'm going to read an actual definition of what boundaries are. So Merriam-Webster defines boundaries as something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. Something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. So what does that imply? It implies that you have to know your limits or your extents in order to set a boundary, correct? And so that's what we're really going to get to the heart of today, because I believe that is the most important part of this. I'm going to start with a quote from Brené Brown that says, "Boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy." Now, remember, if you haven't listened to Tuesday's episode, please go back and listen to that, because that's what I started out talking about was empathy, right? That's what we started talking about and how it turned into people pleasing. And then we have boundaries that needed to be set. So Brené Brown says boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy. And she goes on to say that we cannot connect with someone unless we're clear about where we end and they begin. If there's no autonomy between people, then there's no compassion or empathy, just entanglement. Enmeshment is what she says, just enmeshment. Y'all, what she is really saying is that you can't have the ability to make your own decisions or act on your own values or interests if you're tangled up in what everyone else is doing, what their values are, what their wants are, what their needs are. Because what I believe the true underlying problem with us setting our boundaries is that we might actually know, or we haven't taken the time to figure out the limits or extents that we are willing to go, or that we need to go at this point in our lives. It comes back to priorities, right? It comes back to priorities. In order to set the boundaries, we have to first learn what our priorities are, where they lie, what is important to us, what are my limits, my extents at this season in my life right now. What is that? for me. And that is something that needs to be done so that we can set our boundaries because it can be scary. And you can think of boundaries like, in a negative way when you're either being given a boundary or when you're giving someone else a boundary, because you can take it to mean that it's personal, right? And it's not. It is not personal. Although, if you're setting the boundary, it should be personal, right? But it's not a personal attack or a personal knock on the other person. A lot of times we need to set boundaries with ourselves. I mean, I'm going to be really honest. We need to set boundaries with ourselves. We need to, as mothers, know what's important to us, know where our priorities lie so that we can set those boundaries with ourselves. Right. And we need to set them with our children, and we need to set them with our spouse, and we need to set them with our parents, with our friends, with people that, we volunteer and help out. There's all kinds of ways where we need to set boundaries, but a lot of times it comes down to us not doing the work on the front end to even really know what boundary needs to be set and why. Right? The why is always the most important part, y'all. The why. The why is the most important part. So I'm going to read another quote here. And this one is a doctor. Her name is Corinne Williams. And she says, boundaries are important because they create space for personal growth and self care, as they ensure that your own emotional, mental, and physical well being are prioritized. So she is saying that they create space for personal growth and for self care when we create these boundaries, because they ensure that our own emotional and mental and physical well being are being prioritized. But you have to take the time in order to set the boundaries or figure out what the boundaries are, right? That you need set at this moment in your life. Things may not always look this way, right? Things will not. When you have littles, your boundaries and different things that you're able to commit to take advantage of, to do with your children, they're going to change. They're going to change as they grow up. It's going to change if you have one in diapers and one that's not, versus when they're both out of diapers and they're more self-sufficient, right? Your boundaries are going to change over time. They're not like set in stone. I saw a quote that was like, walls keep everybody out, boundaries teach people where the door is. And I love that, because it is like we're not putting up walls between us and our children, or us and our husband, or us and our parents, or whomever that you're setting this boundary is. You're showing them where the door is, right? Like, you're not saying you're never going to do this or that or the other thing. Or, if you are trying to prioritize doing something for yourself, you're not saying that you're always going to, not let your child come in while you're doing said thing, right? But you are taking this time right now, you're setting it up so that they know that you are going to be during this time unavailable, right? And they know why, and they know that is the boundary, and they know that they are not to come in during that time, because this is your time to work on you. Maybe it is your time to work on something, a business you want to start. Maybe it is your time to pray. Maybe it is your time to journal. Maybe it is your time, to meditate or to do something for yourself. But it is going to be so impactful when you set the boundary up in the right way, and when you know why you're setting the boundary, right? And when the other person also knows why the boundary is being set. And when you're setting it with yourself, right? The key is sitting down and figuring out what you can say yes and no to, right? Saying no is so hard, right? It's so hard for some of us. It's so hard for the people pleaser, right? We talked a lot about people pleasers on Tuesday, and we talked about how even if you weren't inherently like a people pleaser, like you didn't grow up that way, that when you become a mom and you are kind of losing your identity in that, you can become a people pleaser because you just want to, you've fallen into a place where you kind of lost who you are. And so you are getting outside validation from helping others or from being everything to everyone. right? Instead of knowing what you want and knowing what's important to you, you are all of a sudden, like Brene Brown said, you're enmeshed or you're entangled up in everyone else's priorities. And so you tend to want to people please at that point in time because you are losing your own identity. You're losing that autonomy, right? You are kind of just ebbing and flowing into, I found myself like completely wrapped up in what I used to do, right? Like, so I went back to my alumni association and I was getting super involved there. And that had been something that was important to me prior to my children, but it wasn't as important anymore. It couldn't be at that season in my life, right? And so I was getting super involved, but it was taking my time away from where it actually needed to be. Right. But I made this commitment to them. It was like a presidency and it was like a 4-year run. It was a commitment, right? That I had made. And I felt like I had to fulfill because this alumni association was counting on me. Right. And so I felt obligated to fulfill that, but I was out of alignment. Right. We talk all the time about this aligned flow, and I was completely out of alignment. I did not set my boundaries. I did not know where my priorities were. And so if you find yourself in that place where you've said yes to something that you don't feel like you can get out of, or you want to kind of protect your integrity, like you feel your integrity is telling you like you shouldn't get out of that, then you can evaluate other things. So for me personally, I wound up walking away from the business that I was starting because I had said yes to this and I knew. And at that point, I wound up in the hospital, which is why I knew, because I was so stressed out and overwhelmed and just, I had completely lost who I was and was just trying to fill all this like unhappiness, this void with all of these things that I thought might give me what I needed back, but it wasn't because I didn't take the time to sit down and think about what was important to me in this season. Right. And then I could go from there. And that is where the boundaries come into play because you can't really set the boundaries until you know what is important to you and why you're setting them, right? You won't even know what boundaries to set. You can just start setting boundaries and then they won't even really work. Or they'll just, they won't make you happier and you'll wonder, why is this not working? All right. I'm going to read another Brené Brown quote. Okay, y'all. And this one says, when we fail to set boundaries and hold people accountable, we feel used and mistreated. This is why we sometimes attack who they are, which is far more hurtful than addressing a behavior or choice. So, what she's saying is when we are failing to set these boundaries and hold people accountable to the boundary, right? Then we feel used and mistreated. And this isn't the other person's fault, right? Because we haven't taken the time to set the boundary. And so this can happen. I know this from experience, that I found I might have thought that I wanted these boundaries, but I didn't ever, like I said, sit down and take the time to really develop them until later. And so I was mistreating others because I felt violated, right? Like I felt like people were taking advantage of me. I felt like my kids were walking all over me. My husband was walking all over me. When in reality, I wasn't communicating that I needed help or that I couldn't do this or that. I was just trying to do all of the things and be all of the things to all of the people and all of the organizations and everything all at the same time without setting the boundaries. Right. And so when we fail to set them, she said, then and hold people accountable. So that's after you set them. We feel used and mistreated. And I know that from personal experience that this is exactly how I felt, but it was my fault. So, and it can make you attack the person, right? Especially when it's those closest to you. Do you guys find that, sometimes we lash out at those closest to us the most, right? Like we're super nice to everyone else. And then the person closest closest to us, like we're lashing out at them because we're so overwhelmed. We don't want to take it out on anyone, but we kind of have to take it out on someone. And since that person is like stuck with us, then we wind up taking it out on them, right? This is not fair to anyone. And it leads to this like circle, this cycle, this trap that we fall into. And so setting these boundaries is super important, but also doing the work ahead of time to prioritize is also super important and key to setting the boundaries. So I want to end with one last quote, and this one is from Ann Taylor, and it says, "Love yourself enough to set boundaries. Your time and energy are precious. You get to choose how you use it. You teach people how to treat you by deciding what you will and won't accept." Okay. So I am saying you need to love yourself enough to set boundaries, right? You do need to realize and recognize that your time and your energy, they are precious, but they are suffering because you aren't setting these boundaries, especially when you've got littles at home. When you have children and you have other humans to take care of that are, going to be one of, if not your top priority. And when I say they're always your top priority, right? Like, but things like I say, an aligned flow, everything kind of ebbs and flows. And so you kind of figure out what is your top priority without compromising another priority, right? And so when I say they might not be your top priority, that might sound harsh to someone, but what I mean by that is in certain seasons, then they need to be when you are the reason that they are alive, right? Like, well, you are the reason that they're alive, right? But what I mean is when you are sustaining their life, like when they are babies and they literally can't survive without you, or even when they're toddlers and they need your time and attention way more than when they start to get more independent, right? Once they start to get a little more independent, then you can take something and put it as a little bit higher of a priority at that moment in time where your focus, I guess, is. Your focus is always going to be on them and on your family and on your spouse and on all of those things. But you have to decide, I guess, which thing is most important. And still, that sounds really harsh. Like for me, forever, I don't know if you're a Christ follower, but like putting God first was always something I struggled with. It was always something I struggled with. And I always thought, yes, he's first, but how can he be first above my children? Or how can he be first above my husband? Or how can he be first above all of these things? And what happens is when you put him first, then all of the other things become so much better. And so that's what happens with our priority list, right? Sometimes there's going to be a focus where you need to put it in a higher position so that all of the other things can work just as well, if not better, right? And so sometimes self care is going to go up to that top slot. And sometimes, figuring something out or in your business, if you're wanting to start a business or, certain things are going to go kind of to the top of that priority list. That does not mean that the other things on your priority list aren't more important because your kids are always more important than your self-care or than your business or than whatever is at your top priority right then. It's not about the importance. It's just about the focus. I hope that made sense because that can be something that it doesn't really sound like it is something that makes sense. But when you get into operating at this aligned flow, it is going to feel so good. And I am so excited because that is exactly what we're going to talk about in my coaching program, which is I am going to say it's going to be launched next week, y'all. That is my intention and hope is that it's fully launched by next week. You will be able to sign up. If you're interested right now, you can go to my website, Prioritize with Purpose, and say you would like to be a beta tester. It doesn't like commit you to anything, but it does give me an idea that you think you would like to go through this. And for the first beta testing group, it's going to be a really amazing offer that I am offering you. So please go there and check that out and let me know if you have any questions or anything. I would love to help you through this because I know what it feels like to sit with all of these emotions that do not feel good. And you can get through this, and you will if you start doing some of these things that we are talking about. If you want to reach out to me, you can do that at Danielle at prioritizewithpurpose.com. I would love to hear any questions you have, anything you're struggling with, anything like that. Please feel free to email me. And I hope you guys found this helpful, and I will talk to you next week. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, Mama. If something spoke to you, would you take 30 seconds to share this with a mom who may need some encouragement in her day? It lights me up to know this hit home with you. So please leave a quick review of the show and check the notes if you want to reach out to me. I'll meet you right back here next week. Keep smiling, y'all.